great, guys. Last week, I live streamed my conversations with 10 individuals, researchers, journalists, entrepreneurs, and thinkers about one topic, resilience in light of the pandemic. Now, I'm going to share those conversations in a moment, but before I do, I would like to share an idea of my own. It's called Supersystemics. To discuss the concept of supersystemics, I would like to first explain the thought process that went into it. Most people that are watching this video will understand that there's a certain wisdom of the ages that is underappreciated in our modern time. It's that all systems of the world are truly interconnected. Every forest, every ocean, every economy, every mental state, every tree, every river, part of one dynamic supersystem. So this means to talk about anything, we must talk about everything. So if we talk about economies, we have to talk about mental health. We talk about human health, we have to talk about agriculture. We talk about consumer spending, we talk about forests and oceans. Now, if we apply that to modern life, discourse is complex and nuanced. And that's because we lack a lot of knowledge about how those complex interactions work between economies and humans and forests and oceans and even the microbes in our bodies. There's much we don't know. So given the sheer number of unknowns about our world and the staggering complexity, it's really important that we know how to evaluate new ideas and data. How does an economy impact the mental state of the people that are part of that economy? How does a consumer market impact the local ecosystems and the forests and oceans that surround that consumer market? As we all know, though, for many reasons, including misaligned incentives, discourse that acknowledges the complexity and interconnectedness of our world does not happen on national and international levels. So my question is it possible to frame discourse in a new and simpler way? In order to address that question, we have to acknowledge the role of mental models. A mental model is an explanation of someone's thought process about how something works in the real world. Now, we all walk around every day influenced by mental models, perhaps dozens or even hundreds of mental models that we acquire from others, that we learn through life. They help us understand this complex world that we live in. But what are those mental models? So there are religious mental models, there are political ideologies that become mental models, there are economic models that become mental models. These are all mental models that we employ on a daily basis, whether or not we realize it or not. I believe in order for humanity to move forward, we need not only acknowledge the role of mental models, we need to find a way to evaluate them, to identify the beneficial ones, which give us a better understanding of the complex world that we live in, and elevate them. To that end, I would like to propose a mental model. It's called Supersystemics. Supersystemic perspectives and innovations are those that encourage the reversal of monoculturization of earth, body, mind, culture, and economy as a means of solving problems. What are the characteristics of the Supersystemics mental model? Well, the key metrics are human well-being and environmental stability. It was defined to be the antidote to the problem that I mentioned on the first slide, the monocultural thinking and lack of appreciation for interconnectedness. It's an amalgamation of the best aspects of evidence-based science, indigenous wisdom, Gaianism, cybernetics, and other mental models and disciplines that show an appreciation for interconnectedness. I believe it has the potential to be a unifying paradigm for a specific class of innovators, researchers, and entrepreneurs from across the spectrum. Those in regenerative and community-based agriculture, artificial intelligence, microbiome, blockchain, economics, psychedelics, and education reform. I'd like to think it could also give us a tool for elevating the discourse into the halls of power. Are we planning, thinking, investing, voting supersystemically in a way that respects the complexity and true interconnectedness of all systems? Hopefully in the future, we can answer yes to that question. As somebody who benefited greatly from the Supersystemics mental model, I would like to also share that it can be a powerful self-improvement tool. Inevitably, anybody who seeks a greater understanding of how their mind and body is connected to the greater world will lead themselves down a path of self-improvement. Last, the most important trait of any mental model is that it gets stronger with scrutiny and competition. That's not the case for the majority of mental models that we employ on a daily basis. I believe it is the case with Supersystemics. I invite you to test that hypothesis. I believe rich public discourse about the roles that mental models play in informing human behavior and diligent evaluation of the effectiveness of mental models is the key to improving humanity's relationship with each other and the natural world. I invite you to participate. I would like you to share your thoughts on Twitter or another public forum. Maybe you believe it's not practical to discuss the role of mental models in human discourse, or that the world doesn't need another mental model. Or maybe you believe the world does need one, but Supersystemics is not sufficient. Or perhaps you created your own mental model for framing discourse on complexity and interconnectedness. If you're really interested in this topic, my book, Dear Machine, A Letter to a Super Aware Intelligent Machine, discusses it in great detail. It's available in PDF form for free on my website, or you can buy the Kindle, paper, or audio format on Amazon. Lastly, if you're really, really interested in this topic, stop by the website, sign up for the mailing list, and attend one of the future events. Now I'm going to leave you with the live stream that I recorded last week. I hope you find it interesting and informative. Thank you. So my first guest today, his name is David QUAMMEN, and what he has to say is especially interesting and relevant to what we are facing right now. He has been speaking for more than a decade about this idea that pandemics are inevitable and that we should be doing something about it. And so he had a book that he wrote in 2012, Spillover, on the subject. And so we're going to have a conversation with him now. Hi, David. How are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. It's good to be with you this morning, Greg.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to do it.
Yeah, so I would love to, you know, I became aware of your book recently. I wish I had become aware of it earlier, and I wish, more importantly, that, you know, people in powerful places would have become aware of it. You know, I know you've published 16 books. You've detailed the relationship that humanity has with nature and so forth. But I really would like to drill down on what you started to find when you started to essentially what got you interested in this idea that pandemics were inevitable, and like who were the scientists you were talking to, and how that conversation started before you even published the book.
Sure. Yeah. Well, this whole interest started for me probably about 25 years ago when I first started reading about Ebola virus. I got interested in Ebola, and then I did an assignment for National Geographic 20 years ago that involved weeks and weeks of walking across the Congo forest with a conservationist biologist, sleeping on the jungle floor, carrying food, hacking our way through the forest every day. He had a group of about 12 guys, Congolese guys that were helping him. And at one point, we walked through Ebola habitat. We knew it was Ebola habitat because there had been a human outbreak on the edge of this particular block of forest. So for 10 days, we were walking through this forest knowing that Ebola was there somewhere in the forest around us. We knew it was in what's called a reservoir host, which is the kind of animal that a virus lives in over time, permanently, inconspicuously, and then occasionally spills over into humans, as Ebola does. So I realized this was, we didn't know which animal it was. It was just there. It was sort of this spooky presence. We kept walking, and I kept thinking about this mystery of where the Ebola virus lives, and I realized this is all about ecology and evolutionary biology. So I got interested in the ecology and evolutionary biology of scary viruses that live inside animals and occasionally spill into humans. And that led to my book Spillover. I started working on it probably in the late 2000s and worked on it for 5 years, traveled the world to forests and caves in southern China and other places where scientists were working on the subject of zoonotic diseases, scary viruses in the animals that carry them, and how contact with those animals by humans gives these viruses the opportunity to spill over into humans.
Can you share your core thesis from Spillover in terms of what is it that we're doing wrong that leads to this, and if there's anything that we can change?
Well, what causes, right, this is not something out at the weird fringe of medicine. This is dead center for human health. 60% of our infectious diseases fall into this category, zoonotic diseases. And that includes some of the old ones like bubonic plague and some of the scariest new ones like this coronavirus or like the SARS virus in 2003. All of those events, when one spills over into humans and causes an outbreak, a cluster of deaths, or in some cases an epidemic throughout a country, all of those instances are connected to one another. They're part of a pattern. And the pattern reflects things that we humans are doing. What are we doing? Well, you mentioned that there are now more than 7 billion of us, actually 7.7 billion, I think, right now, humans on the planet. We are smart, we are hungry, we are voracious for resources, we travel a lot very quickly. So every choice that we make, what to eat, what to wear, what to buy, what kind of electronic devices we might have, how many children we have, if we have children, how much we travel, all of those put pressure on the natural world. We're pulling resources from the natural world. We're coming in contact with wild animals. We're invading ecosystems. We're cutting down trees and building timber camps and mining camps in tropical forests. All of that activity essentially shakes loose viruses, or gives viruses the opportunity to jump over, to spill over into humans. And if that happens, if a virus spills over into the human population and it can replicate, it can transmit from one human to another, then that virus has won the sweepstakes. It can travel around the world at the speed of an airplane and become one of the most successful viruses in the world.
Just as we're seeing now, this highly successful.
Just as we're seeing now. I would say that the virus that causes COVID-19, we call it SARS-CoV-2. That's the name of the virus. I would say it is one of the most successful viruses in the world right now, in sheer Darwinian terms.
Wow. So it's easy for, I think it's easy for Westerners to kind of distance themselves from what's happening and why this stuff happens. Can you talk a little bit about, the action, our activities in the Western world and how they contribute to, these interactions with the wild world and shaking the tree and shaking viruses loose from those environments?
Right. Yeah, there's a tendency for people to say, especially people who say in the U.S. or in some of the Northern and European countries, to say, oh, that's the result of things that people are doing over there. That's a result of quote unquote bushmeat hunting and consumption in Africa, or that's the result of wet markets in China. People are capturing bats and civets and pangolins for food. That's caused by them. In fact, there's enough responsibility to go around. Things that we do are increasing the spread of Lyme disease in this country, are increasing the spread of West Nile fever, and also indirectly adding to the jeopardy of new spillovers, new opportunities for strange new viruses to pass from wildlife into humans. For instance, I've held this up, cell phone. If you own a cell phone, if you own a laptop computer, then you are a customer for a mineral called coltan, C-O-L-T-A-N, which a lot of people have never heard of. Coltan is important in electronics because it's used to make tantalum capacitors. You don't have a cell phone without tantalum capacitors. Where does coltan come from? Well, it's mined in just a few places around the planet, and one of those places is the southeastern corner of the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the coltan mines are in or adjacent to highly diverse Central African forest containing lowland gorillas, containing lots of different species of bat, lots of different species of rodent, porcupines, lots of different species of primate. So when we buy a cell phone, we put consumer demand into the system, into the super system for coltan. And we commission Congolese fellows to go into that forest and mine coltan. What are they going to eat there? Are they just going to eat rice? Are they just going to eat fufu? No, they're going to eat bushmeat as well. So that's one of the ways in which we share in this global responsibility, this connectedness, in the demands that we make, consumer and reproductive choices, putting pressure on the natural world, bringing wild animals and the viruses that wild animals carry closer to the interconnected human population.
Great, thanks for sharing that perspective. I mean, it's sort of non-intuitive in a way, but once you get your head into it, it makes sense of how deeply our activities kind of contribute to that process. If I have one quick question, and then we have to wrap up. We're doing these very quick 10-minute interviews, but If you were to somehow influence government to enact one policy, global governments, what policy would it be? Like, what kind of thing can we lobby for at the political level to prevent this kind of thing from happening?
Right. What we most need is, again, it's in your wheelhouse. We need connectedness. We have global connectedness in terms of people flying around and viruses riding around with them. We need connectedness of information better. Scientific information already has a high degree of connectedness, but public health information and public health policies, development of technology for fast diagnostics of new viruses, and then the political will to support the institutions that produce better healthcare technology, better public health policies, better scientific exploration, viral discovery. So I think it's for me, it's those four prongs. It's science, technology, public health, and then governmental policy. What we need is for those to be coordinated much better from country to country.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing these thoughts with us today, David. Appreciate it very much. I would love to chat with you another time sometime.
Sounds good. Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Take care. So next, ABIODUN Henderson, hailing from, well, actually she was born and raised in Brooklyn, but she's working and living in West Atlanta. She's a social entrepreneur, community organizer. She's executive director of the Come Up Project and Gangsters to Growers, which we're going to talk about. Hi, ABIODUN.
Greetings.
Greetings. How are you?
I'm well, as well as we can be.
Yeah, considering the situation. So, you know, I didn't want to start this conversation without, you know, since we're talking about communities and communities of color in particular, talking about the unfortunate and I guess somewhat predictable situation that we're in that communities of color and are being impacted by the coronavirus at disproportionately greater rates than other communities. But I think it's emblematic of the kind of thing that we've seen over time anyway. So I would love to, I don't know, just get a sense from you, like what's happening in the community right now that you're working in.
Well, you know, at first we thought as Black folks that we weren't susceptible to this disease. Mm-hmm. So we were, you know, participating in our regular activities, you know, which is funny. It's probably based off the history. It was like, yay, finally, we're not affected by something. Yeah, it's not us. And let's get this party started. And then now we're seeing that because our immune systems aren't as strong, because of the food that is in our neighborhoods or our lack of access to healthy foods and that herbal knowledge that was with our ancestors has kind of been lost throughout the generations. You know, we haven't been able to take the best care of ourselves. So now we are some of the most affected. Also, we have to work. You know, we don't have the privilege or luxury. A lot of us do not have the privilege or luxury to stay at home and work from home. When I was living in New Orleans and worked in the restaurants down in the French Quarters, everyone was Black. The back of the house, the casinos, the whole service industry, which is what keeps, you know, New Orleans alive, is everyone is Black. You know, and you know, here in Atlanta, we're lucky that we haven't been hit the hardest. I think the warm weather has been good for us, you know, all the different things. And Atlanta is pretty, you know, we have a vibrant vegan community, a vibrant holistic community here in Atlanta. So we're not getting hit as hard as, you know, Chicago, New York, and other cities. But that's it.
Okay, thank you for that context. Can you talk a little bit about your work with the Come Up Project and Gangsters to Growers and community farming in general, and like its role in kind of resilience and that sort of thing with regards to situations like this?
Yeah, well, speaking of that farming, I got to give thanks to my ancestors representing the Crew tribe, KRU, the Crew tribe of Liberia, which we've been known to be the hardest to enslave historically. And just thinking about that background, the African background, and how we were rich with the knowledge of agriculture, which is one of the reasons why us as Black people, African people, were brought here to the Americas to use that agricultural knowledge. Um, so with the Come Up project, when I became a community organizer with Occupy the Hood, the brother Malik Rasan was like, food first, programs in the community. I was like, yes. And several years later, in 2016, after witnessing what was going on in the community, doing a camp with different workshops for a few years, being put into the agricultural the Black farmers world here in Atlanta, and seeing there was a lack of labor. The farmers just couldn't, because farming and our food isn't really respected as it should be in this country. The people that do the work to get us the food that we need to live isn't really respected. These farmers are struggling. They couldn't afford labor. So, and the youth, they needed money. They're out here in the streets doing whatever they can and gentrifying neighborhoods, jealous of the folks that are coming in with all these wonderful things and are getting in trouble because of it, right? Poverty breeds theft and crime. So with all that, I was like, okay, gangsters to growers, we're gonna take 18 to 24-year-olds from the west side of Atlanta, get them paid $15 an hour through the city, through the Workforce Development Office in the city, and let them experience what farming really is about. A lot of Black people in this country are traumatized. They look at soil and they see pain, trauma. They're just like, no, my ancestors were enslaved. Y'all was whipping us. No, I'm not growing this food. That's slave work. That's slave work. I've heard so many leaders around the country, Black leaders that are in the farming world, or Black farmers, which to me are leaders, right? Say that, kids have been yanked from gardening programs because their parents were like, no, you ain't doing that slave work, right? Which is like horrible. We lived with that agricultural knowledge. So we just want to get folks back to the land. The land is healing. The soil itself pulls toxins out of your body. Food is life, and right now we're not eating the right things.
Right.
So we're not eating the right things. So we said, okay, we're going to get them on all these farms, Black farmers specifically, because the youth need to see themselves within these farmers in order to feel empowered. But we knew the money and just them learning how to grow food and being a labor force for these farmers, we knew that wasn't enough. That's just not going to cut it. It's not going to heal our community and get us on the right track to getting generational wealth and just loving each other unconditionally like we need to survive, right? So we added yoga. Why should I only have the privilege? Me and my friends have the privilege of doing yoga. They did art. They're doing art therapy, right? During the last program, where they're able to just color and talk. And I was amazed myself how well that worked. It was another young person that came and brought that to us. And I'm gonna run through these really quick, but shout out to Fort Negrita for Anna Marie of Fort Negrita for her environmental responsibility education that they get every week, where they learn how to become zero wasters. We empty the garbage and figure out where everything is supposed to go, extractive and energy, what's regenerative. Business classes at Clark Atlanta. We do nutritional cooking with all different vegan chefs that are in Atlanta. Boxing, writing, political education. We have grassroots leaders like Mary Hooks from Song that came to do several workshops and taught the youth how to navigate their local government, right? Who's first, who's second, who's last? What do you need to do to get something pushed forward through local government? We did so many different workshops: African history, sex education, know your rights training with Maoli Davis from Davis and Bozeman Law Firm. We just keep adding things because it's about the whole mind, spirit, and body. Wow. When it comes to our community. And most of the youth that are under 23, I think our oldest trainee is 23, have children.
Wow,
2, 3
incredible.
children.
And so
One, two, three.
can you talk a little bit about, so just thinking of what, that transformation, somebody, whatever happened, got incarcerated, probably because of the drug war or something like that, but they come out of prison, and then they get into your program. Can you talk about that transformation? Is there also, like, I didn't realize you had all these all these other services around. Is also this health transformation? Is it they're becoming entrepreneurs, they're becoming healthy, they're becoming hard? Like, tell us a little bit about that transformation. That sounds like a really beautiful thing to behold and watch as it's happening.
Yeah, so for us, we're getting youth that have been incarcerated within the West Side neighborhoods of West End, Asheville Heights, Westview. And when we're surrounding them with so many people with all this knowledge, because all the classes I mentioned are taught by different people. And we've seen, for example, Quan, our first trainee from 2016, he'll talk about, hey, I found somebody on Instagram and they're talking about spirulina and wheatgrass and how you should eat your food and what fruits and vegetables. I see him becoming a political activist, walking around his neighborhood, talking about gentrification. He's telling the young people, hey, get a job, let's work. You got to make this money. It's not, it's not productive, good for your mind, spirit, and body. To be on these corners, you will get locked up. He himself has become an inspiration along with a few of the other young people. And what's really, once you're a gangster grower, you always are, because we're building a worker-owned cooperative. We have a great product called Sweet Soul. Shout out to Beyonce, who when she said hot sauce in my bag swag, we were part of a Black farmers cooperative called SWAG, Southwest Atlanta Growers Cooperative. And I was like, oh, we're gonna make hot sauce. So we make Sweet Soul with lavender, turmeric, dark muscovado sugar. And now we have hired some of our former trainees to become part-time employees. They call themselves developers. They are developers of the cooperative. And yeah, we're building worker-owned businesses, which we know is the future in order for everyone to be sustained. We have over 500,000 homeless people in this nation.
Wow.
Which we are touted as the richest country in the world, and all these different lies, because what are riches, right? Food, clothing, shelter, healthy food, what are riches? Really. But yeah, so we're doing that. And then during this time of COVID, I should let you ask another question.
Yeah, we need to, we're trying to do these super fast interviews.
Yes.
Can I ask one more quick question?
Yes.
So, clearly there are communities just like yours all over the country, just as you're saying, and the number of homeless people and so forth. Can you think of some kind of political engagement on a national level that can happen to encourage this type of entrepreneurship in communities around the country, as opposed to doing what we have to do now and kind of organizing locally without the national, without government really appreciating what's happening or contributing to it?
Well, I'll say everything starts locally. Research cooperatives. There are, hundreds of worker-owned cooperatives, farmers co-ops, buying co-ops, food, grocery co-ops all over the country that you get plugged in. There's national organizations. There's Federation of Southern Cooperatives, national organizations all over the country. Going to local government and pushing that. But really everything starts locally. It grows from there. During this time, we've been involved with a lot of mutual aid organizations. So with a bunch of other organizers, we've developed a mutual aid fund for Atlanta, the Mama Fund. So research mutual aid, because organizers that are grassroots, they're talking about mutual aid, and that's where you can plug in for real.
Awesome. Thank you so much, ABIODUN. This was enlightening, and it's really great to hear about the work you're doing in the communities, and it's so important for us to kind of highlight that and elevate it. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you, brother.
So we're jumping into our next guest, is Gregory LANDUA. Hey, how are you? So I just wanted to say a brief second about what you're up to. So Greg is the Chief Regeneration Officer of an organization called Regen Network. And he's also a writer and a longtime worker in regenerative agriculture and consultant and so forth. He wrote a book called Regenerative Enterprise. And so now today we're going to talk about the way that blockchains and other open tools can be used for ecological regeneration on a large scale.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Greg. Really excited about the awesome panels that you've put together.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, could you tell us a little bit about, first of all, just tell us about regenerative agriculture. Give a brief overview on regenerative agriculture and the way it's different from, you know, the normal agriculture that we see out in the communities like cornfields and wheat fields and so forth. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So regenerative agriculture is a way of engaging with agriculture and maybe land use more broadly in a way that actually increases the health, vitality, and viability of the ecosystem, of the soil. So we tend to look at indicators like soil organic carbon, biodiversity, water retention, and we sort of associate an increase in the health of those indicators with the practices that we sort of lump together as regenerative agriculture. And some of those practices include shifting from tillage to no tillage. If you're talking about annual crops, they are perennializing and engaging in agroforestry or silvopasture, integrating and rotating animals in ways that instead of overgrazing, you're actually renutrifying the landscape. Okay. And in essence, you know, I would sort of distill regenerative agriculture is farming in a way that sort of synergizes the value extraction in generating calories and medicine and fiber and other things that we need to have in our human civilization in a way that is actively regenerating the sort of base agro-ecosystem that we're interacting with.
Okay, so if we think about agriculture and climate change, agriculture and deforestation, these are all things that we care about now. Yet we continue to, it continues to be difficult to get food that is not grown in a monoculture, that is grown in a way that that doesn't destroy the land, that creates conditions for climate change. But so can you talk a little bit about ecosystem services and what they are and how you can kind of quantify the transition from a monoculture to a robust kind of polyculture and regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first off, I'll just sort of start by framing, you know, currently, as many viewers and listeners may know, agriculture, broadly speaking, the industry of agriculture is both the largest industry in the world and the largest emitter of carbon in the world. If you sort of lump together all the associated transport, chemical processing, you know, everything that's just the agriculture industry. So agriculture is our biggest sort of climate threat. And it, you know, obviously people might also look at transportation or other things, but you can sort of make a pretty strong defense of agriculture as the biggest. It also can be the biggest net sequesterer, which is kind of like leading up to what Greg's question is. You know, agriculture can be transformed through regenerative agriculture to actually be completely carbon negative. Climate positive, carbon negative. That means that more carbon is sequestered into the agro-ecological systems than is emitted. So that's where we start to talk about two things: ecological function and ecological service. So ecosystem functions, these are things like the carbon cycle, hydrological cycle, nitrogen cycle, and having healthy function creates services. And those services are things like carbon drawdown, carbon sequestration, cleaning of water, maintenance of biodiversity, all of these services that are that are essentially what in sort of classical economics are considered public goods, or these things that we don't currently place monetary value on, so they end up as market failures. Or that is to say that businesses, in competing with one another, externalize costs and actually degrade those public goods, and they end up eroding soil, they end up carbonizing, oxidizing carbon and decreasing ecosystem function. So that's sort of some framing. And so one of the ways that people are responding is actually creating markets for ecosystem services to re-internalize those costs. Those are things like carbon markets, water markets, and markets for biodiversity.
Cool. Can you talk, so if you think about a farmer, say his farmer is farming corn in the Midwest somewhere, they obviously have these really simple supply chains set up for taking the corn to the market and to making the soda or the corn products and so forth. Can you talk, it sounds like regenerative agriculture is logistically a really difficult thing to do. And so I'd like to have you talk a little bit about Regen Network and the ways that you'll use blockchains and satellite data to kind of assist in that process of taking this very kind of simple million acres of corn and convert it into this area that has lots of different species of plants and is more friendly to animals, more friendly to wildlife, captures more carbon and so forth. So yeah, if you could.
Sure. I mean, there's a couple of moving pieces there. And so I'll just be specific about the piece of the puzzle that Regen Network is focused on right now, which is the monitoring, verification, and quantification of ecosystem services. So what we're focused on is being able to make a claim about a particular parcel of land that's scientifically robust and tells us how much carbon was sequestered or emitted through the course of the agriculture that took place. And so we use satellite information, we use farmer records, we integrate with third-party auditing or existing extension agents, etc., to sort of compile and create a verification system so that if a farmer takes the risk associated with shifting out of the sort of agrochemical industrial way of doing things to one that is optimizing for soil health, we can quantify the ecosystem services they're providing to the larger community, and businesses and governments can participate in essentially valuing that public good that's being generated. So the big challenge for farmers in transitioning is risk, right? And the risks, it's interesting because there's a whole lot of complex and perverse incentives at play in our system due to the way that subsidies, crop insurance, and as you were noting, just sort of like the supply chain actually work to sort of make it kind of hard for a lot of farmers to transition. So our goal is to make it possible for farmers to actually accrue an extra income stream for the climate benefit they take by incurring the risk of transition. And that actually aligns stakeholders, because if you can value the ecosystem services that are generated through the transition, you can bring investment on board, you can align company interests, because a lot of companies now have climate pledges, and so they want to see their scope 3 emissions being reduced or turned into carbon credits, right? And so if you can kind of align all of these complex stakeholders with a single goal, which in the case of like a cornfield, that single goal is going to be something like soil health. Is the health of the soil being maintained or improved, which is directly correlated to the carbon content of that soil, and that content can be quantified and used to sort of do carbon accounting.
So if we do this work, then we're capturing more carbon, we're creating more opportunities for wildlife, we're just essentially making it a better place to be and a better part of our,
And actually, after 3 years, yields restabilize and start to increase in the case of corn. you reduce downstream flooding risk because there's higher water retention. There are all of these direct economic benefits that stakeholders accrue, but there's a time period where there's sort of risk and some yield decrease. And so you really need to incentivize and reward the sort of like common good benefits that take place through crossing over that sort of valley, right?
Awesome. Well, we're a little bit out of time here, so thank you so much for jumping on the call today and doing this work in general. I think it's super interesting to create these incentives to change our agriculture so that it really serves our needs better. Thanks again. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Greg.
Right,
cheers.
So next up, we have Robin HANSON. So Robin is a really interesting individual. I'm actually in the middle of reading a book he co-wrote called The Elephant in the Brain. There's another book he wrote, which is on my list. It's The Age of M, Work, Love, and Life When Robots Rule the Earth. But what we're here to talk about today is prediction markets. So if we think about all the challenges that we have faced in having discourse about things that might happen in the near future and so forth, it's very clear that we're not very good at predicting the future and that we can be better. And so who better to speak to than one of the pioneers in prediction markets, Robin HANSON. Welcome.
It's great to be here, Greg. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. So yeah, could you tell me a little bit about, first of all, you have a really interesting background, working in physics, working in artificial intelligence, and now an economics professor. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what drives you, like what drives you forward every day and every week? You have some really interesting theories on how we can deal with the coronavirus and stuff, which we're not going to talk about today, but I would love to know kind of like what drives you on a daily and weekly basis.
Well, I'm more what they might call a polymath or generalist.
Okay.
I think most people would be that if they could as intellectuals, but the professional environment kind of forces you to specialize in order to succeed. And I sort of slipped by barely, not specializing as much as I should have.
Nice.
But I basically get to look around and ask what's the most important, interesting question, and then focus on it. So I did too much of that before I got secure, but now that I have tenure, I can do it as much as I want. And one of the most important questions is, how do we together decide what to believe about most everything, but including policy choices?
Nice. And so can you tell us, so you were part of kind of promoting the idea of developing or prediction markets. Can you give us a sense of what a prediction market is and how it might be helpful?
So all through our lives, including most of the previous talks I just listened to, we have to make choices about what to believe. We have to decide how to believe. And epistemology is the name given for this question of how to decide what to believe. But most practical epistemology is social epistemology. How do we together decide what to believe? How do we come together into a shared institution? And an obvious way to test the difference between institutions is just to look at head-to-head horse races. Two institutions predict the same thing at the same time, who's right? So in the horse races we've seen so far, we consistently see one institution winning. When there's in the same topic at the same time with similar resources, and you're looking at institutions that have to be robust and general, then speculative markets or betting markets have just consistently won these contests. Either they're about as good or substantially more accurate than the other. So that suggests that we try to use betting markets a lot more to decide together what to believe.
Okay, so a betting market is essentially, let's say it's a technology platform of some sort where people can come on and they can propose a future situation, such as coronavirus is going to spread around the world, and different experts can then bet on the potential outcome that it's going to spread to 1 million people, it's going to spread to 500,000 people, and the
right.
person.
So for example, right now, we're worried about whether we can let up lockdown and how much we could let up lockdown. So we could be betting on how bad this is going to get, and then bet conditional on whether we let up on lockdown now, say, or May 1st, or whether we wait till June 1st or something like that. We can ask for different decisions. What does the market expect the outcome to be? An outcome that we care about, and that's what I call a decision market. And that's, or I've given the name Futarchy to that when used in a governance mode. And the idea is that we could inform our key decisions by letting market speculators tell us what they think will happen, conditional on key choices we might make.
Okay. So these are, so essentially it sounds like what it's doing is it's giving incentive for people to come together and focus on a particular question, and an incentive for people to get it right. So if you have an expert who is currently working in some bureaucracy at a government, they might be better off spending their time on this, trying to make predictions about the future, because they can essentially, they can bet on it and they can make money from it, and they're
right.
Yeah.
So there's all these people out there who know different amounts of stuff, but unfortunately a lot of them pretend to know more than they do if you would only listen to them more. And we have to decide who to believe and how. So we can't just go with what people say that they know. We can't just go with credentials prestige, because there's a lot of people who have a lot of credentials who don't know very much about a key topic. And there's a lot of people who know a lot who don't happen to have credentials or prestige. So we need a way for people to self-select and say, I do know more, but then suffer the consequences if they're wrong, and the rewards if they're right. And that's what a betting market does. So if we have a betting market on, say, how bad COVID gets, if we release lockdown on May 1st versus June 1st, then even if they have some personal business interest in the decision, when they're betting, their mainly incentive is to get it right, to make the correct prediction so that they will win their bets.
Interesting. And in theory, it can make us much smarter about all the decisions that we make on every level in government and so forth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So most of our institutions that you're part of say that they are trying hard to collect expert information in order to make informed decisions to help us all. Your businesses, your churches, your governments, your clubs, they're all saying that that's what they're doing. And they do that to some extent. But honestly, most people know that most organizations, high-level actions and interactions and what people say is dominated by politics. People are savvy about saying what they think people want to hear, saying what the dominant dogma is, agreeing with their powers that be. People are so eager to say what people want to hear and to say what will make them look good that they don't pay as much attention as we'd like to getting it right, to being accurate. And so the question is, how can we create an institution that these people would participate in and be as selfish and ambitious as they might always be, but channel that ambition into giving us accurate answers to things.
Okay. And so so if we look at our world now, this, governments and companies and so forth heavily politicized, can you see a path forward just for example, in government, in order to the point where government is working on systems like this, where they can make predictions kind of in a transparent manner and really kind of have a conversation with the populace that really makes sense? Because right now, nothing makes sense. None of these conversations make sense.
So the hard thing is not to figure out how to make the world better. Unfortunately, the hard thing is to figure out how to make anyone care about making the world better. That is, we have these institutions that seem very promising, and we could adopt them and plausibly make ourselves better. But what we really need, I think, is the most likely path is to do trials, to do demonstration projects, where at a small scale in a limited domain, we apply this method there and get a track record of success or failure. With a consistent track record of success in small personal applications or small organizations, then we can entice people to try larger and larger applications based on seeing the other success and wanting to copy that success. So in fact, even though I think this has great promise for national or even international governments, I'm not proposing to do that now. What I really would like people to do is to get their church or their business or their small organization to try this for their key decisions, collect some data about that, show us, compare doing it the usual way to doing it this way, collect a track record showing that this works better. Just like we already have the track record that prediction markets in general seem to work better, but we need to show that for the purpose of advising decisions, this works better. And that can inspire people to copy. So I like to think of this as like cost accounting. Today, we have the practice of doing cost accounting. That is, we watch for people stealing the money and seeing where the money goes and where the resources go. Imagine a world where nobody did cost accounting. In that world, if you said, hey, I think we should do cost accounting in some organization, you would basically be saying, somebody around here might be stealing. Let's find out. Now, that would not be a very welcome message. You would be pushing uphill to try to get that adopted. Now imagine a world where, like ours, where everybody does cost accounting on most big projects, and you say, hey, let's not do cost accounting in this project. Could we just do that, please? People would interpret that as saying, you're going to want to steal, and you'd rather us look away. And no, we're not going to do that. The same concept can apply for these prediction markets or these decision markets. In a world where nobody's doing them, if you suggest doing them, you're basically saying, somebody's bullshitting around here. We need to cut through that and find out what's really going on. It's not actually a welcome message in most organizations. You're kind of insulting people. In a world where for every project, say you had a deadline, you just had a prediction market on that deadline. If somebody said, could we just skip the prediction market on the deadline this time, please? Would that be okay? Well, then, of course, the problem would be people would be thinking, you're saying, we're going to miss the deadline, and could we just not look at that? So I have hope that if this became the usual thing, then people would be pressured into doing it just because it would look bad not to do it. So even though people aren't doing it now, and it's very hard to get it started, just like with cost accounting, if it was the usual thing, I think it could stay.
Okay. And just one last question, then we have to wrap up. But what is the current legal status of prediction markets? I know there were some problems because technically it's betting, and people put it in the same category as like betting on cards or horses and stuff like that.
Yes. So if you want to do a prediction market with you and strangers participate, then the betting market obstacle will be substantial. But if you have an organization with, say, employees or members, and the organization can sponsor people to participate, then there are not legal barriers in terms of betting. That is, the betting law requires three things. You put consideration in, you get consideration out, and there's chance in between. If the organization sponsors participants, then they never put anything in, and so it's not gambling. Okay. So in fact, most organizations can do this legally. They are put off because it's politically disruptive. Basically, as I say, most organizations are dominated by politics, and these prediction markets are out of control. It's like having an autist, someone on the spectrum, be in the C-suite, someone who's really smart and really knowledgeable, but doesn't know whether what they say is politically acceptable or conflicting with some dogma. That person would not last very long in the C-suite because they might become an assistant to someone else, but they would not be allowed to sit at the main meeting and just say whatever came in their head. Got it. And that's what prediction markets do. They are disruptive because of that, which is why people are reluctant to adopt them. But if you could get your organization to just try it, and I'd be happy to help, then we could start to create a track record of showing that this works, and then shame or inspire others into copying. Awesome.
Well, I'd love to at some point get on the call with you to discuss how we can raise the profile in prediction markets and make us all better at predicting the future. But thanks so much for jumping on the call today. Really appreciate it. This is such an interesting thing. I'm really enjoying your book, The Elephant in the Brain. Yeah, I like your mind. It's amazing.
Great to meet you, Greg.
Great to meet you as well. So next up on the list, we have Dr. KATERINA Johnson, and her area of expertise is the human microbiome. We previously talked with Gregory LANDUA and ABIODUN about agriculture and the way that food is grown and so forth. And one of the things that comes up in that environment is soil. And what makes soil healthy is all the microbes and so forth. So, but in fact, everybody, I think most people now know that we also have a microbiome in our guts, and it has a huge impact on our health. KATERINA Johnson, Dr. Johnson at Oxford University has been thinking about this stuff for a long time. She's been studying it. She has a TEDx talk called The Secret Power of Poo, which we're really not going to talk about today, but you should watch. But hi, KATERINA, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. I'll just open because I've got a few.
Yeah, I'm going to give the floor to you so you can give a talk, and I'm going to take a little break from talking.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yes, so I'm Dr. KATERINA Johnson. I'm a researcher and science communicator from the University of Oxford. And my specialty is the gut microbiome. So just a quick background on the topic of the microbiome. The latest estimate is that only half the cells in our body are human, and the other half are microbial. And most of our body's microbes live in our gut. And we call this the gut microbiome. And it contains literally trillions of bacteria. So in fact, we each have more bacteria in our gut than the number of stars in the whole of the Milky Way galaxy. And the gut microbiome is probably one of the most complex ecosystems you could really study. So just to give you a bit of a flavor, these are the chemical reactions that are going on all the time in one bacterium. And all you have to understand from this image is that it's really complicated. And these aren't even all the chemical reactions, it's just the main ones. And we have hundreds of species of bacteria and different strains within species, and they can all do different things. And then all of these bacteria in our guts are interacting together. So just imagine a network of interactions, a bit like this, but scaled up by trillions. And that's just the bacteria, let alone all the viruses, fungi, and other microscopic organisms making up this ecosystem. And one thing about our gut microbiome that's really so amazing is its resiliency and also its relative stability within individuals. So if you're generally kind of healthy, your gut microbiome composition doesn't really tend to change that much. So if, for example, you suddenly change your diet or for a week, or you have to take antibiotics, your gut microbiome typically returns to its pre-disturbance state. I mean, this can take kind of 6 months after having antibiotics and sometimes longer. And from the point of view of like theoretical ecology, it's intriguing that our gut microbiome is able to maintain a relatively stable state despite its exceptionally high species diversity. And so findings in ecological network theory have actually shown that competition between microbial species is really key in allowing our microbiome to maintain its stability. Whereas on the other hand, if you've got microbes that are cooperating with each other, this actually tends to reduce the stability of our microbiome, because then, for example, a decrease in abundance of one species can have knock-on effects for its cooperating species. And this can kind of set the scene for an unstable microbiome. So if you want to have a stable and healthy microbiome, we want a lot of competitive interactions going on within a diverse microbial community. And so diversity of the gut microbiome has generally been linked to both better gut health and also overall health. So some key things I showed in my own recently published research is that a diet high in fiber is really good for promoting a diverse gut, and a lot of research is now really supporting this. Also, trying not to stress too much, because stress can actually reduce the diversity of your gut. Not taking antibiotics unless you have to, and also consuming a diverse diet, because different types of bacteria break down different types of food. So basically, if we have a broader range of micronutrients and macronutrients in our diet, this is more likely to help foster a more diverse microbiome. And also I found that eating naturally occurring probiotics and naturally occurring prebiotics, but not in supplement form, can also help to increase the diversity of your gut. So naturally occurring probiotics are found in foods like fermented cheese, sauerkraut, kimchi, and naturally occurring prebiotics is a specific type of fiber that's found in foods like bananas, legumes, whole grains, asparagus, onion, leek, etc. So on top of this really complex microbial ecosystem, all these microbes and the chemicals they make can influence the immediate environment of our gut, and in turn affects kind of our physiology in so many ways. So our metabolism, our immune system, our nervous system, and our hormones. So from the point of view of this talk, obviously I'll focus on the immune system. So our gut actually has more immune cells than the rest of our body put together. So 60% of our immune system is actually located around our intestines. And this kind of makes sense when you think about it, because our gut is exposed to the outside environment via the food we eat. So it's really vulnerable to attack from outside invaders. And it's really important that our gut can recognize threats and also mount a defense. And so the presence of gut microbes helps to stimulate our gut to develop immunity. So our gut microbiome composition, particularly when we're young, is actually really important for kind of the correct development of our immune system. So the first microbes that kind of colonize us in early life are kind of our body's like first teachers. And they instruct our immune system about what microbes are dangerous and it needs to attack, and what microbes are harmless. And this is actually one of the main challenges for our immune system, because it has to learn to differentiate between commensals, so these are kind of microbes that don't cause us any harm, and pathogens. So these are microorganisms that can cause disease, whether that's bacteria, viruses, or fungi. And the gut microbiome is important not only when we're young to train our immune system, but actually gut microbes are in constant communication with our immune system throughout our life. So this diagram is simply just to illustrate that microbes in our gut can affect so many different aspects of our immune response. So the microbiome's effect on our immune system isn't actually confined to the gut. Our microbiome instructs our systemic immune system, so basically an immune system that circulates our entire body. So really, our resident gut microbes shape our immune responses in a very global sense. And we can think of the gut microbiome kind of as operating a dial that controls both the sensitivity or responsiveness of our entire immune system. And the setting on this dial has to be just right. So when invaders are present, so for example, coronavirus, if the immune system mounts a slow response, the pathogen gains an advantage. But if the immune system is overzealous, this can result in excessive inflammation or autoimmunity. And in fact, there's some thought in the field that the gut microbiome may be linked to an increase in autoimmune conditions that we see nowadays. So conditions like eczema, asthma, allergies, etc. And this is because if we limit our exposure to microbes, especially when we're growing up, which is increasingly the case in Western cultures, we grow up in more sterilized environments, kids don't play outside as much, we're over-reliant on antibiotics. Our immune system may not be exposed to a diverse range of microbes when it's developing. And so basically, it may end up wrongly interpreting harmless agents as pathogens and launching an attack. And so this can result in an overactive immune system. So whilst it's good to have an active immune response to infectious agents like coronavirus, and if it's overactive, this can actually be very dangerous. So in fact, one aspect of the immune system that you might have heard quite a bit of in relation to this novel coronavirus is a cytokine storm. So cytokines are small proteins that are released by lots of different cells in the body, including those of the immune system. And they basically help to coordinate the body's response against infection and to trigger inflammation to fight the infectious agent, or in this case, coronavirus. And a certain degree of inflammation is good, right? So for example, when the coronavirus enters the lungs, it triggers an immune response, and this then attracts immune cells to the region and to help attack the virus. But then sometimes the body's response to infection can go into overdrive. So in coronavirus patients, excessive cytokines are released, which then activates more immune cells, which then release more cytokines. And so basically you end up with a positive feedback loop, resulting in kind of hyperinflammation. And this is what really damages the lungs and what results in respiratory failure. And in fact, this is some really recently published data from the pandemic, where they basically looked at the levels of a particular cytokine in the body called interleukin 6 or IL-6, and they found it was actually a very good predictor of whether patients became critically ill. So basically, when patients were admitted to the hospital, they measured the levels of this cytokine, and they found that those people that had a higher level of the interleukin were more likely to subsequently need mechanical ventilation. And so this kind of supports the thinking that this cytokine storm is associated with more severe outcomes for coronavirus patients. I mean, obviously, you know, this is kind of a brand new field. We don't really know any direct research yet on the link between the gut microbiome and coronavirus, but we do know, at least from previous research in animal models, that the microbiome does influence your susceptibility to a cytokine storm, which kind of makes sense, really, given our microbiome's, you know, integral role in our immune system. So yeah, overall, generally, we know that if you have good gut health with a stable, you know, diverse and resilient gut microbiome, this can really help to promote a healthy immune response. Although, however healthy, you know, your gut microbiome might be, you're still susceptible to catching viruses like this, you know, novel coronavirus. And it's also kind of intriguing from a scientific point of view to do with this virus is the really wide range of symptoms that we see, from people that are asymptomatic to people who are really severely suffering from this virus, even, you know, young, fit and healthy adults. And perhaps one of the reasons why some people have such severe symptoms and others only have mild symptoms, obviously apart from age being a factor and underlying medical conditions, is due to like genetic variation amongst people in terms of the receptor that the virus uses to enter the cells. But it would also be interesting if there were any specific research in the future looking at you know, the composition of the gut microbiome and whether that can predict, you know, people's immune response to this coronavirus as well. So yeah, thank you for listening. Let me know if you have any questions.
Awesome, thank you, Katerina. So yeah, just one quick question. So do you think it's safe to say, I know the science is not there yet, but you think it's safe to say that one of the strategies for protecting yourself against disease with coronavirus is one of the diseases that we protect ourselves against would be to have a gut-friendly diet and to take care of the microbes in our belly and to be kind of proactive about our health in that way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, we know from like research in the past decade or so that the bacteria living in our gut play a really important role in our physical health and maybe also even our mental health as well. And I think that that's something that is starting now to, you know, come onto the horizon of the general public who are really interested in gut health. But yeah, it's really important for our immune system to be healthy. The link between our gut bacteria and immune system is incredibly strong. So, you know, of course, like nothing will definitely protect you from, you know, coronavirus or any other viruses, but helping to maintain a like diverse gut and, you know, eating well, particularly a high diet high in fiber, because we know that definitely has a very beneficial effect, can really help your gut microbiome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kat. I'm going to move on to the next speakers, but this was super helpful and super interesting to know that there's something there in our guts that we can support and kind of do to keep ourselves healthy. Thanks again.
You're welcome.
Next up on the list, we have MADISON MARGOLIN and SHELBY HARTMAN, who are journalists that work extensively in the psychedelics space and cannabis and drug policy and mental health and spirituality. They've written articles for everything from Rolling Stone to The Atlantic to Playboy to Quartz and Vice, etc. I called them up to ask how they might propose that psychedelics can, you know, perhaps help address the global crisis that we're facing right now in various ways. And I think they have some ideas to share. So off to you two.
Thanks, Greg. And hi, everybody. Wow, this is a massive topic, so I don't know how we're going to cover it in 10 minutes, but we'll try. As Greg mentioned, I'm co-founder of Double Blind. It's a psychedelic media company and print magazine. We're a physical print magazine in bookstores. And I'm going to let MADISON just take it away.
Hi, I'm Madison Margolin, co-founder of Double Blind. So our presentation is on how psychedelics can help address our global crisis, or in other words, how psychedelics might be able to change the world or save the world, depending on how you look at it. So we've identified a couple psychedelic principles that are going to sort of lead the presentation. These principles are based on what psychedelic scientists have identified as the quote-unquote mystical experience, which is actually based on 7 criteria. And one of the main ones is this feeling of oneness. So that's during a psychedelic experience, someone might have the experience of quote-unquote ego death, where the self sort of dissolves, and you feel a little bit more connected to other people on the planet, and also more connected to your sort of inner soul. And that kind of gives a more outward perspective. Another psychedelic principle that we've identified is openness. So psychedelics, and specifically psilocybin, which is the main compound in magic mushrooms, can cause neurogenesis or new connections between neurons, and that can lead to personality change, new political perspectives, new ideas, and conceiving of new paradigms. A study at Imperial College London showed that there's a causal relationship between psychedelics and personality change, which scientists thought was pretty much finished, by the time you were in your early 20s, that could help people grow or even heal from trauma. Also, psychedelics, according to another study published in the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs a few years ago, are associated with liberal and anti-authoritarian political views. A few other psychedelic principles we've identified is the concept of Aini, which Shelby will talk more about. It's it's spoken about largely in South America, but it's the idea that when you give to the collective, you also will benefit. So as part of the collective, when you're giving, you're also receiving and benefiting. And all of these principles sort of underscore what we like to talk about at Double Blind, which is the relationship between individual and collective healing. So the idea that in order to be able to serve the community, you have to be able to first to address your own trauma or anxiety or depression. It's sort of like those videos on airplanes where you have to put on your own mask before you can help someone else. But at the same time, our individual wellness is impacted by the wellness of the collective. So a society is only as strong or as healthy as its weakest person.
So it's important to understand that when we look at the data from Hopkins and NYU and a lot of these other large research institutions that are researching psychedelics for their therapeutic potential, they're actually finding a intimate relationship between the extent to which you experience mysticism and all the principles Madison talked about that come along with mysticism, and the extent to which you personally find healing. So we're actually seeing this in the data. So in creating this sort of trajectory from self-healing to communal healing to planetary healing, for those who don't know, sort of the 2 main indications for which psychedelics are really being moved through the FDA approval process right now are post-traumatic stress disorder. The Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies is now in the last phase of clinical trials for MDMA for treatment-resistant PTSD. And we also are seeing that psilocybin, the psychoactive ingredient in psychedelic mushrooms, is on the fast track to being approved for major depressive disorder as well as treatment-resistant depression. The reason why this is important, especially now, is because obviously, we're talking a lot about the virus and the fear around the virus. The psychological impact of what's happening now is as profound as the physical impact of this virus. And, these are incredible tools to go inward and to reflect upon, what happens when we're living in a climate of fear.
So we want to look at sort of going back to individual and collective healing. One prime example would be sort of the Israel-Palestine conflict, right? So a lot of that conflict is perpetuated by by PTSD in the region, right? So when people feel existentially threatened, and that trauma is consistently reinforced, that's going to inform how people vote, how they react toward one another, what actions they take. So MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, which Shelby mentioned, is already carrying out MDMA for PTSD research, also has research sites in Israel, where they're, again, looking at trauma in this conflict. And there's also a study on ayahuasca for conflict resolution among Israelis and Palestinians. So again, here's just a prime, wonderful example of how people can address their own personal healing for the sake of outward, more collective healing.
And the data is so interesting. I definitely would recommend that people read some of the surveys of people coming out of this ayahuasca trial for Israel-Palestine, because really, like, one of the most profound takeaways, I think, is that people are seeing people on the other side of the conflict as human beings, right? Like that this is what's happening when they're all sitting in ceremony together. If we want to look to an example of how psychedelics are being used to address the climate crisis, to kind of transcend community and extend to the planet at large, I think that it's really important that we take a look at the indigenous and traditional use of psychedelics and plant medicines. Sometimes we forget, but these medicines have been used for thousands of years in indigenous communities around the globe. I have a quote here from a Colombian leader who is a part of, it's called Yumiak. It's a collective of 5 indigenous communities who drink ayahuasca in the Amazon. And he says here, he told me, for working purposes, you might separate the personal, the community, and the planet, but within the vision, the cosmology of indigenous communities of the Amazon rainforest, you do not separate these things. Individual health is collective health. Collective health includes the territory. We're talking about the ecosystem, which is inseparable, and it's very important to view it as one. And so, like, when these indigenous communities are going into ceremony, they're not saying the way that, like, we might, if you go to sort of an underground ayahuasca ceremony in the United States, you're not hearing people say things like, I'm drinking ayahuasca to heal my trauma, or I'm drinking ayahuasca to heal my depression, but they're going in and they're saying, I'm drinking it because I'm trying to have a vision for how we can approach the European migrant crisis, or I am asking for wisdom from the plants as to how we can deal with the foreign oil and mining extraction of our territories now. And after they come out of these ceremonies, they actually use the visions that they have in the ceremonies and create action items for how they can help implement more equitable policies, both locally, nationally, and internationally. So you're actually seeing communities that are a part of this collective that drink ayahuasca in the Amazon going to the Ecuadorian government, going to the Colombian government, going to the United Nations and saying, this is the vision for the world that we have, and this is how we think that you should implement these things on a policy level. I'm going to come back for my next point. I'm going to bring us back down to earth a little bit, because I think some people are probably thinking, right, psychedelics are going to save the world. We do want to acknowledge the limitation of psychedelics and plant medicines. When you look at the psychedelic community, unfortunately, you do see currently that there is sexual abuse happening among phony ayahuasca leaders, and there's been problems of sexual abuse among researchers in clinical trials. We've seen a gross underrepresentation of indigenous voices at conferences. We've also seen that a disproportionate amount of participants in psychedelic clinical trials going back to 1993, actually more than 80% have been white, male educated participants. So this is just to say that if we want to understand how psychedelics can transform the world, we can't just assume that, you know, you're going to trip with your friends in the forest and then you're going to have some revelation and the world is going to be changed. But we actually have to look to models, whether it's this trial in Israel, Palestine, or the indigenous use of plant medicines, to understand how psychedelics are just the first step on a journey to waking up and then actualizing the lessons that you learn to create a better world.
This is super interesting and helpful. It's you know, the context on the global level, on the community level, on the personal level. You know, I'm definitely aware of the power and so forth, and I just really love the way you explain it. Can you just one last question, then we have to wrap up. But can you tell me, so with all the legalization that's happening, recreational, also medicinal uses and so forth within the United States, do you think that the regulations are on the right path to taking the full use of what's available in the power of psychedelics? Sorry,
we never know who to take it. So psychedelics, as mentioned before, are definitely on the path to being approved for a number of indications for which the Western medical community has no idea how to treat. So that's promising. Absolutely. The movements that are spreading across the country to decriminalize psychedelics are promising because nobody should be behind bars, in our opinion, for possessing or using a psychedelic drug. That being said, it is important to understand the limitations, as mentioned before, of the FDA approval process. You know, treatment-resistant depression and treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder are major issues in our society, but there are so many other people who could benefit from psychedelics, and this sort of like recreational medical dichotomy, which we've seen play out in cannabis, doesn't account for the spiritual use of psychedelics, as well as like all the other indications that people might want to use psychedelics for if they haven't been like specifically diagnosed with a condition by a psychiatrist or a physician.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks so much. We have to wrap things up, but just for everybody else, Double Blind magazine, check it out. It's amazing. It touches on all these perspectives, not just the medical, but also the personal and the personal growth opportunities and the legalization and so forth. I think it's an amazing magazine, so check it out. Thanks so much, Shelby and Madison. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Bye.
So next up on our list is a professor from Rice University, Dr. Anthony BRANDT, and he's also a composer, and he's the chair of the Composition and Theory Department at Rice University. He co-wrote the book, The Runaway Species, How Human Creativity Remakes the World, and has a very interesting perspective on creativity, which he's going to share with us today. And this book is also, it's been published in 16 countries, or 13 countries, and there's also a documentary on Netflix, which I just watched last night, called Creative Brain, that is inspired by the book. So Dr. Anthony BRANDT, welcome.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for inviting me to be part of these fascinating discussions. And I'm just going to quickly share the screen here. Give me a quick second.
Sure.
And play from start. And I hope everyone's safe and comfortable in these challenging times. Right now, we're holding our online meeting at an unprecedented time in human history. We're all sheltering in place with the challenge of keeping ourselves and our loved ones busy and engaged. And that gives us the special opportunity, not just to be consumers of culture, but also to explore our own creativity. And then at some point, the global lockdown will end and we'll all venture back out into the world. We have no idea what we'll find. Revert back to our normal routines, or maybe the landscape of human culture will be dramatically reshaped. Preparing for that future also requires our creativity. There's no way we can know now what's going to work for us then. And the safest way to deal with that uncertainty is to diversify our options. The good news is that human brains are built to handle exactly these types of challenges. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. I'd like to begin with a basic question. Why do we have brains in the first place? Well, from an evolutionary perspective, the first reason was controlled motion through space. Brains enabled organisms to guide where they go. And that led to the second important reason. Once you could control your motion, you could decide where to go. And that required making predictions. Where were you more likely to find food or shelter or a mate? So brains evolved to be prediction machines. For instance, there's a sea squirt that spends its early adult life searching around for a nesting place. And then when it finds one, it attaches itself there permanently and eats its own brain. It is the ultimate couch potato. Its life having become perfectly predictable, it doesn't need to think anymore. Now, in animal brains, the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that enables us to simulate possible futures. Notice how much larger ours is compared to other mammals, and how much greater the percentage of total brain mass. And that's true of every human brain. As a result, we have an enhanced ability to speculate about possible futures. And there's more to it than that. As far as we can tell, Other animals mainly have the ability to envision things that have already occurred. They learn from experience, but they remain anchored to it. Humans appear to have an enhanced ability to envision things that have never occurred and may never occur. No other animal seems to be able to unmoor itself from reality like we can. So imagination can be thought of as predicting something that has never happened before, and creativity as making it come true by human hands. The more unlikely the prediction, the more original the creative thinking. Shakespeare's Macbeth offers an illustration. An apparition tells Macbeth that he'll never be vanquished until a nearby forest named Birnam Wood comes to his castle Dunsinane, which is clearly something very unlikely. But then his enemy Malcolm instructs his soldiers to cut down the trees in Birnam Wood and shield themselves with them as they march on the castle, an ingenious way to conceal their numbers. And so something that has never happened before comes to pass by human hands. That's creativity. So brains are prediction machines, and creativity is based on the ability to predict or simulate something that has never happened before. In fact, studies have shown that damage to the prefrontal cortex diminishes creative ability. But that's not quite the whole story. The neuroscientist Anna Abraham has asked, how does a predictive system that evolved to ensure fast, accurate, goal-directed action give rise to novelty or originality when goals are unclear or the situation is open-ended? And the answer to that question is because of each other. Humans are one of the few social species on the planet. We're not the fastest or the strongest or the fiercest creatures, so our ability for teamwork has been vital for our survival. But in order to engage each other socially, we have to overcome a phenomenon called repetition suppression. So human brains consume about 20% of the body's energy. And 1 million years ago, long before refrigerators and 24-hour mini-marts, wasting energy was very risky. So our brains evolved to be ruthlessly efficient. If the brain recognizes that a stimulus is repetitive or predictable, it pays less and less attention to it. That's what you're seeing in these brain scans, which show less and less of a response to the same stimulus. So we tune out to the familiar. And that's a problem if we want to bond with each other and maintain long-term relationships. We can't keep zoning out. But surprise engages us. Our brains get excited when they experience something new or unexpected. So we have a biological mandate to surprise and impress each other. Our ability to imagine possible futures and our social natures are in a virtuous loop with each other, supercharging our creativity. And what we're discussing right now is true of every human brain. All of us are carrying around on our shoulders the most inventive piece of machinery nature has ever produced. So although this is the first time in human history that the entire world has been on lockdown, nature has prepared all of us to adapt. In some sense, we were made to deal with situations like this. So what are some keys for leveraging our creative abilities? Well, in the psychology of creativity, the equal odds rule says that because introducing new ideas to the world is so unpredictable, every novel idea has pretty much the same odds of succeeding as every other one. So the more novel ideas you come up with, the more winners you're likely to create. Several decades of research have indeed shown that when it comes to creativity, quantity is the best predictor of quality. Pablo Picasso is the poster child for the equal odds rule. He's one of the greatest innovators of the 20th century and also one of the most productive. So for instance, here is Manet's painting, Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. Well, Picasso painted over 200 variations of Manet's painting. So it pays to proliferate a lot of ideas. Or as Maya Angelou put it, you can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. And there's another twist to proliferation. Because it's hard to know what the world will need, You don't want to just iterate ideas that are too similar to each other. Instead, it's important to proliferate options that cover the entire gamut from the familiar to the far out. Idea diversification depends on going different distances from the familiar. So for instance, Iris van Herpen has designed ready-to-wear clothing that you can buy off the rack, along with far-out haute couture. Similarly, Timex regularly upgrades their classic watches, keeps up with trends with this fitness watch, but also explores far-out ideas like the time at your fingertips watch, which fits on a fingernail. And universities invest in new buildings while at the same time experimenting with online learning. Think about how better prepared those institutions are for the current situation thanks to their diversification. So you don't want to just stay at a fixed distance from where we are now. You want to venture near and far from the familiar. Now, when it comes to developing creative habits, there's really no one-size-fits-all solution. Still, there are a few tips I'd like to share. The first is simple. Do what you love. You'll be more motivated. Second, don't treat what you're making like a piece of pottery that can't be broken. Instead of one right answer, look for as many great answers as you can. And to do that, have plenty of paper or computer memory or whatever supplies you need, and save all of your drafts. You don't want to have to destroy what you did before to try it a different way. That is a big impediment to idea diversification. And for the same reason, banish the eraser except for minor corrections. Once it's gone, you may never get an idea back, and you always want to be able to retrace your steps. Now, just like you need a lot of paper, give yourself a lot of time. Research has consistently shown that the longer you think about a creative problem, the more original your solutions get. In other words, it takes time to fly farther from the familiar. So to conclude, brains are predictions machines, and the human brain is uniquely wired to predict things that have never happened before. Creativity involves bringing those predictions to life. The greater the uncertainty, the greater the need for alternatives. Now, managing risk in the stock market is all about diversification. And similarly in life, use the power of human creativity to diversify your options. You can do that by giving yourself plenty of paper and plenty of time and exploring the full spectrum from the familiar to the far out. That will help all of us productively pass the time now and prepare for the world we will eventually rejoin together. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anthony.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, so we have to wrap it up, but I just want to let everybody know this: the book, The Creative Brain. I'm sorry, the movie, The Creative Brain. The book. Sorry, I'm blanking on what the Runaway Species. Definitely recommend digging in on those. I think it was a super interesting talk you gave Anthony, and you know, we have so much time on our hands. It's really interesting to kind of see where our minds go, you know, in terms of what we do at that time, and you know, creativity. I mean, what better area to focus and put your time into? So, really appreciate the talk, Anthony. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you.
Have a great one. Bye-bye. So next up on our list is GABRIEL, AXEL MONTES, and he's got a really interesting background. He's a neuroscientist, educator. He's done a lot of research in the brain's process of modeling reality and perception in a specific area. And then also his recent research is in beneficial AI and virtual reality. And so he's going to take us on a little tour of consciousness. Just, I don't know if you heard, but I gave a brief introduction about your background and the fact that you're going to give us a little tour of consciousness and hopefully give us some ideas of you know, kind of turning inward a little bit and kind of capping things off before we start with Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on with this really nice panel. I've been listening in, and it's fantastic So basically, my sort of meta goal in professionally and personally is sort of like aiming for a kind of Rosetta Stone of my two passions, which is neuroscience and self-cultivation. You could say body-mind practice. So it's very much sort of in the mainstream now, even to be into mindfulness, and psychedelics have started to really have a renaissance, which is really positive for awareness of general the potentials of consciousness. For myself, it's been many years that I've been involved in both, and I remember early, even in my undergrad days, when I was pushing to do psychedelic research, and everyone was saying no because it was still kind of, we weren't out of the dark ages, so to speak. Now it's really great to see everybody kind of back in. So the view, I think, that is the pandemic, the current one, is currently really ushering us, inviting us into, is one from a much higher viewpoint of 25,000 feet, in which we are viewing the world and ourselves from the point of view of nature kind of with a capital N, so to speak. And in a sense, our species and all the multiple species and COVID, the view from nature is essentially just of interdependent aggregates that are part of a complex system at varying scales, interacting biologically, psychologically, through the kind of fear responses we're seeing and people taking advantage of the fear as well, and also opportunities that are emerging. So the view in a sense is one where one becomes aware as an individual of the interdependent aggregate nature and existence. Typically, our view is kind of, for neuroscientific and cognitive reasons, is sort of bound like gingerbread cookie to the physical. That has to do with the many, many generations and the whole lifetime that each of us lives, trying to survive and focusing on the response and stimulus and actions of the body and what we learn from that interaction proprioceptively, etc. But the reason that we think the self is anchored into the body is really because the body is the nexus of all the multiple sensory stimuli that arrive. Because they're arriving at the one place, we interpret that this is the nexus of our location. And so in a sense, consciousness, which if we're skeptical, we don't necessarily say, okay, it's definitely coming from the body, located in the brain. If we just kind of leave it to time and science and experience to prove it, we can say, well, just the fact that things are occurring, all the multisensory stimulation is arriving at this body, and therefore our the mind, in a sense, puts more resources into focus body. It doesn't necessarily mean that the mind is located in the body. One of the questions I like to ask with regards to philosophical questions of where is the mind as well, I ask, well, you can tell me of your brain, right? But can you tell me of your mind? So it's a very different kind of ontology and epistemology. So bodily self-consciousness and the neural mechanisms that produce it, the sense of this body is mine and I'm located here, strongly condition the sense of self and where we believe consciousness is. So in a sense, body-mind practices of non-ordinary consciousness, I would call it, that lead us into experiences that are not in the ordinary that we experience every day when we're filling out our checker, checking our email, or grabbing food. These practices usher our worldview into a more expansive place where we're aware of interdependent aggregation. So you can kind of see the difference if you look at the way that we view nature now. We typically view nature as something in the environment, and it feels like a wall of green, rather than being a continuum of exchange of energy that is not just intellectually, cognized or apprehended, but rather is something that is experienced and lived. So ordinary consciousness practices take us gradually in that direction. Particularly, starting mindfulness is great to get people in a place of relaxation, which then release the inner tensions that pretty much shackle you to perception limited to the body. But beyond mindfulness, which is kind of the first wave of that we're going through in society right now, there are very, very specific practices that address very specific things in consciousness and take you in the directions you want to go into. So one of those practices, for example, is called Mahamudra, which is a Sanskrit word, also used in Tibetan Buddhism, which basically means great gesture. But the point of the practice is essentially centering yourself in the core of your kind of watching experience, so you can't go back anymore. You're observing the observer and so on and so forth. And from there, viewing an object or sets of objects and asking kind of in a very open way, where are interdependent aggregates? Can I separate different causes? Can I determine the different causes and what effects they give? And the more and more open and less cognitive there is an approach to it of trying to analyze and break things down and determine a cause, the more that there's an openness while observing and being with this awareness, there is a kind of sense that there is kind of no origin and no destination, but kind of just a sea of changing in an aggregate. And from this point of view, you could start with just in this practice focusing on one object, or you can then open up into your periphery, maintaining your eye focus forward, and you'll know that your mind will want to jump around and analyze certain things. That kind of jumping around and getting out of your body, going into subject-object duality, is in essence a separation of a cutting, a severing of that continuity very subtly. You can go and analyze something, but to actually still be in continuity with it, different matter, and that needs to be practiced. So the obstacle here to this is essentially how much our brain is in the habit of holding on to the one identification body, and this has very roots in our evolution. Also, the human species is in a sense a collection of builders. We're all makers, and we do this it's kind of innate in our cognition to externalize and build things. As we traverse through an environment in which we're trying to survive and preserve homeostasis, part of what we do is try to problem solve, or at least creatively experiment with the environment with our hands, as we're bipeds and we have an open hand brain loop. Our hands are not glued to the ground, so we can engage in experiments manually, dexterously, and also then symbolic experiences when we can't reach for the object, but we can then use our minds to reach for it. So every time we make a tool, say a stone axe, you are experimenting almost proto-scientifically with your environment. And the moment you make that tool, that cognitive effort that was used to make that tool to solve a particular problem, or at least creatively experiment your way into a solution you find after the fact, that's all a process of exercising the mind through creative problem solving and tool building. Now that took us that process from stone axes to art, automobiles, factories, calculators, and even artificial intelligence. So even today, it's part of almost like a subtle effort in mind that we're trying to almost replicate, because we project our own self-identity into everything we make, and everything we make is very much tailored to our needs and the needs of those around us. So in a sense, what we create, everything around us, from the architecture to the artifacts to the tools and the art, is a product of the collective problem solving that we've all been engaged in. And that comes from, and that is born of, our image of ourselves at any given moment. Because the more we build, the more we understand ourselves. So what we build is then conditioned upon our self-understanding at any given moment. Now the issue there, I would argue, is that we don't fully understand our capability of consciousness unless we dig into the treasury of techniques that have been offered by the world's wisdom traditions and indigenous traditions over the eons, the centuries and the millennia, and use those techniques. We can eschew the dogma if we like, and then just focus on what those techniques are, human consciousness. And then we get a better idea of who we actually are and what we're capable of. And then our bar for the kinds of works we produce is raised. You can almost say that we would less easily fall for some kind of a Turing test as to whether an AI is actually intelligent. Our bar for the capabilities of human intelligence is set higher and higher the more we practice and integrate these techniques. So in a sense, there's the of creating the world we want to create, and the view from nature of interdependent aggregation of understanding that we're situated in a complex system with which we're continuous, is a matter of unearthing human intelligence and then translating, executing that into the artifacts that we make individually and collectively. This then starts to kind of create the world that we want. These instances like pandemics now create an opportunity to like level and our conscious focus our awareness on one. It's very seldom that all of humanity, let alone in a globalized era, that can create solutions to and focus on one thing and the local solutions that are both local and global at the same time. Now, we actually get to this place where we're bootstrapping our consciousness into the directions we actually want to. Well, there's various tools available, but essentially it's you want to be aware of the way in which consciousness works at a cognitive level, so you can turn your predictive nations of, as we were talking about earlier, the previous panelist, that loop of just constant stasis, staying in habit, and propel it into a spiral driven by intent, openness to change. And that there's various ways of doing that. That's one of the projects that I've been working on in my career, is creating a sort of neuro-phenomenological framework that can enact the parts of cognition that are necessary for certain experiences. And it would be very amazing if we can crowdsource knowledge into such a framework and use that as a knowledge base, the amazing intelligence of human beings, and then from there, use that as a jumping point to build better AI. And to get into these non-ordinary consciousness, to build them as traits, just occasional items, due to nootropics or small sessions of mindfulness, we need constant immersion in these practices, even while we're interacting with the world. So only about sitting, also getting up off your mat or getting out of the psychedelic session and taking those insights and forward, and then using further tools that open the neuroendocrine system's abilities, that one can actually amplify the feelings and the conditions psychologically, emotionally, physically, that produce comfort in being in a constantly critical transition, as you transition from one idea of who you are and what you think you are to the next one, and being able to traverse those criticality thresholds till eventually we a stable view from nature from 25,000 feet, and understand, feeling and embodying the fact that nature is a continuum, and that it represents the kind of evolved complexity that we can only aspire to replicate in advanced AI. And I think on that note, our next speaker here is we'll talk a bit about advanced AI and the potential in that realm. So yeah, thank you, Greg. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Awesome. I guess I'm just curious, this is an amazing talk. I mean, thinking about the physiological aspects of kind of growth and consciousness, and how we look at the world, and kind of changing the way our perspective on looking at the world and so forth. I'm just curious if you are fairly optimistic, like after we get through this mess that we're in now, that there will be a net benefit to the fact that we're all sitting at home, spending more time with ourselves, more opportunities to be creative. If we, obviously a lot of people are going to suffer, lose family members, economic challenges are going to be just an incredible tidal wave affecting a lot of people. But do you think in the end, say we get out 5 years and 10 years, that this could potentially be a net benefit to humanity?
I think it could be, if we choose to look at it that way. I think ultimately it's a choice, because certain people who will be disproportionately affected by this negatively, and others positively. But I think striving to take the opportunity of kind of a home staycation or a work vacation, however it is for each individual, to learn to spend time with themselves. There's people I've talked to that really know how to be with themselves. And for someone like me whose hobbies have been very kind of balanced between extrospective and introspective. I'm a guitarist and musician. I read, I meditate, and then I also go out and do things. So I can kind of draw from both, but a lot of people, I think, have to learn to be with their interior self and see the vast expanse that is there in themselves, and then translate that into something beneficial. So to your question, I think it's a way of, okay, you know, if I have lemons, I'm gonna make lemonade, and it's gonna be a damn good lemonade.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to get Ben on the line and have the closing conversation. But this perspective is really interesting. I think your work in neuroscience and AI and virtual reality and stuff is so intriguing and important and interesting. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you.
Next up on our list is Dr. Ben GOERTZEL. He's essentially one of the leading people, researchers in artificial general intelligence, which, you know, well, I'll let Dr. Ben explain what artificial general intelligence is.
Hey, Greg, thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here. I've been listening into the last few talks.
Awesome, thank you. Could you give us, just to get this conversation off and running, could you give us a kind of an overview of what artificial general intelligence is for folks that might not know?
Yeah, absolutely. So what is meant by AGI, or artificial general intelligence, is AI that can, you know, learn, generalize, extrapolate, and imagine far beyond its experience or its teaching or its programming. I mean, just as we can deal with weird situations and new technologies that we didn't learn about in school, and that were certainly not evolved directly into our DNA. And, you know, the term is intended as a contrast to the narrow AI that currently dominates the commercial AI world, which is highly valuable in carrying out specific tasks, but it's still of a nature that each AI carries out, you know, one particular type of task. And if you want to make an AI do a different type of task, you have to go in and retrain or reprogram the AI, whereas an AGI is able to act as more of an autonomous agent and deal with new things in a adaptive and proactive way, like people. And I mean, we can see in the world right now with all this COVID-related disruption. I mean, people are needing to think on their feet a lot. Our social and governmental systems are needing to think on their feet a lot, and not always doing a good job of it, right? I mean, we're seeing need, and in some cases a lack of general intelligence being displayed by our human systems. And you can clearly see how having AGI engage in the human world might have been very helpful in this situation. But, you know, it's still still a research topic, although fortunately one that we're making rapid progress on in recent times.
Awesome. So narrow AIs is the artificial intelligence that makes our shopping websites better, that drives our self-driving cars, etc. But AGI is more like a human brain, and that can solve vast, complex problems and so forth. AGI does not exist yet, right? Sorry.
I think that there's your summary is basically correct, but there's a couple brief clarifications I'd want to add.
Great.
So one is, it's not either or. I mean, they're just like intelligence isn't either or, generality of intelligence isn't either or, and we can get, you know, more and more generally intelligent systems. And I think we have more generally intelligent systems now in the AI field than we did 5 years ago, right? So, for example, AlphaZero has more general intelligence than AlphaGo, because it can learn to play all sorts of different games, not just Go. And I mean, Google search engine, once they upgraded to use transformer neural networks this year, that became a bit more generally intelligent than their previous keyword search engine. So it is a continuum, and humans are not at the maximal point along that continuum. Like we are not the most generally intelligent possible system. Rather, we're around the minimal generally intelligent system capable to understand what general intelligence is, right? Like we're the first creature on Earth that's smart enough to really understand how stupid we are, and understand the potential of becoming much more intelligent. So I mean, AGI in general, it's not just about emulating human intelligence, right? Human intelligence is just a particular waypoint on the path from current narrow AI toward massively more general intelligence. But you're right. Like right now, the most generally intelligent AI systems we have on the planet are not nearly as generally intelligent as even an average human, let alone Einstein or something.
Okay, so artificial general intelligence is essentially a continuum, and at some point on that continuum, it reaches the level of humanity, or a single human being, and hopefully passes. Is that essentially where we're going with this?
Sure.
Okay. So so do you have a sense of, so at that point, so at some point, I guess they call it singularity or whatever, but at that point that artificial general intelligence meets the level of human, do you have a sense of how that might happen? Like, is it going to happen on the computers of Facebook? Is it going to happen in a public forum? Is it going to happen in a government entity? It seems like that's an awfully powerful tool that could potentially be.
And I mean, the answer may be that it happens in a bunch of different places at around the same time, and then these different early stage AGIs connect to each other and form a sort of global AGI network, so that it's then happening, all around the world, being a sort of emergent AGI global brain, which then crafts the next AGI level that humans can't even fully comprehend. So I mean, I think if you look at what's happening in the AI field now, the discovery of new algorithms and approaches is happening largely in the open source, with papers uploaded in Archive and code on GitHub and so on. So it's not like Facebook and Google have different algorithms or fundamentally different AI ideas than Baidu or Alibaba, or say a random university AI researcher in Iran or Ethiopia or anywhere, right? So I mean, the understanding of how to build AI is sort of growing up all around the globe in a quite cross-connected way. The deployment of AI algorithms to yield practical systems takes not just the algorithms, but a lot of data and a lot of hardware. So that takes money, right? So what we're seeing now, the knowledge of how to create AI is open and global, but the actual practical AI systems deployed are being deployed and owned and exploited by those who have the most financial resources, right? And that's where we are at this moment. But on the other hand, we've seen other cases. So the internet and the Linux operating system are cases where, something that's huge and amazing and that's controlling in some ways large parts of the world managed to emerge in a globally distributed and open way rather than controlled by large entities, in spite of competition by large entities, right? Like mobile companies would probably like to take over the internet. Microsoft and Apple for a long time wanted to get rid of Linux, but they didn't, right? So we've seen cases where sort of an open and decentralized global brainish approach has prevailed over entities with tremendous amounts of resources. And I think it's still open whether that's what's going to happen with AI or not. I hope it is. And I mean, obviously I'm working toward that.
Yeah, can you, so I understand that your hope is to increase the likelihood that when an AGI gets close to the level of human or passes, that it's inherently benevolent toward the needs of humanity and so forth. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, I think to anyone who takes the prospect of creating general intelligence at the human level or beyond really seriously, I mean, the question, what is the value system, what is the goal system of this AI becomes incredibly important, right? Because I mean, on the one hand, yeah, I want to create, intelligence with infinite capacity if I can. It's very cool, and in a sense that has importance beyond any of our individual lives. On the other hand, like I have 4 kids and 1 granddaughter. I'm married. I enjoy being alive myself. Like I don't want to see the creation of like arbitrarily intelligent superhuman minds annihilate myself and all my family and friends, right? I mean we want to create something amazing going far beyond humanity, but we want to do that in a way that will also be beneficial to humanity along the way. And I mean that's not especially how the evolution of humans happened. I can't say the emergence of humans was necessarily beneficial toward the proto-humans and great apes and whatever, right? And we can't say that the emergence of industrial civilization was necessarily great for the subsistence farmers of the world either. On the other hand, we're engineering AGI, and to some measure, we're engineering the singularity, right? I mean, so this is all happening now on a faster time scale and with more deliberative thinking than these prior transitions in human history. So the hope would be, and this gets back to Gabe's talk right before this conversation we're having. I mean, the hope would be that humanity can find the presence of mind and the reflectiveness and the compassionate consciousness to go along with the amazing technologies we're developing, so that we can build AGI and the whole network of supporting and associated technologies in a way that benefits humans, you know, the physical environment on the planet, other animals on the planet, and the digital and quantum life forms that we're creating. Like there doesn't have to be a conflict between creating amazing AGI minds and benefiting human society. I mean, nor between some people moving on to totally different ways of living and existing as AGI develops versus some remaining in a more traditional human form. I mean, the conflicts there are really created by humans' limited ways of thinking. And yeah, it's you know, one thing that pops into the mind of all of us thinking about AGI and the radical changes in the future is, you know, if the human world is disrupted this much by this virus, which is bad, but yet not nearly as bad as you could imagine a pandemic to be. I mean, how is human society going to cope with the really big crises and changes that are bound to come? They're bound to come as we move toward the singularity, most of which will be very good, I feel, some of which may be dangerous and shocking for periods of time. So yeah, we're seeing a little glimpse of, you know, both the competence and the incompetence with which our current societies deal with a sort of modest grade disruption.
Yeah. So super interesting. One of my so I understand that with at SingularityNet, what you're trying to do is use blockchains on a kind of a practical level. Can you talk a little bit about that opportunity? Why blockchains are
absolutely. So, I mean, there's many architectures one can use to develop and deploy AI. So you can have an AI just running on one guy's computer, one company's, or one government's computer system, or you could have an AI that exists as more of a distributed network where you have different components of it running on different machines or controlled by different people, and there's intelligence in each of the parts, but there's a greater intelligence in the whole coming out of the coordination and the sum of the parts, right? And if you have the latter architecture, which AI pioneer Marvin Minsky referred to as the society of minds, in this latter sort of architecture, then you have the question of who controls the overall network. And, you know, the answer I would like to see realized is, well, that's democratically controlled by all the participants in the network. But then how do you do that on the operational level? Like you have a bunch of programs running on different machines all over, and they're all doing some AI and helping some people with their AI problems. They're exchanging data, they're outsourcing work to one another. Well, how do you actually coordinate a collection of AI processes running on different machines in different places without a central controller? And, blockchain enables that. Blockchain technology lets you have a decentralized computing process without any central dictator or controller coordinating the whole thing. And this was Vitalik Buterin's vision of the Ethereum world computer. Ethereum is one way to realize it, which we're using in the underpinnings of SingularityNet. But by now, there's a load of other interesting blockchain technologies that can be used in this way also.
Cool. And can you talk a little bit about, I understand that you have a hackathon coming up to try to develop solutions for coronavirus? Yeah.
It is ongoing. It's ongoing now, actually. So yeah, we, through SingularityNet, we have come in touch with a large developer community of people developing software at the intersection of AI and blockchain. And this has to do with using the SingularityNet platform for decentralized AI, but also beyond SingularityNet as a particular tool. So I co-founded with Tufi Saliba and Simone Giacomelli, I co-founded last year, actually 2 years ago now, co-founded in early 2018, an organization called DIA, Decentralized AI Alliance, which brings together 50 plus different organizations building stuff at the intersection of AI and blockchain. So given that this developer community is there, so many people were contacting me and others in the space saying, well, how can I use what I know to somehow help with this crisis that's disrupting the world so much? And so we ended up organizing a 2-month online hackathon called the COVID-a-thon, which you can find out by searching COVID-a-thon online. Look at DevPost, and COVID-a-thon is on DevPost, which is an online hackathon platform. And this started April 1st, but it's running for 2 months. We wanted to give a reasonably long period of time because this is challenging stuff, right? And we're basically, we're throwing some of our own SingularityNet code and projects in there to try, and having some of our staff donate time to help with COVID-related projects. But more importantly, we're leveraging just the overall decentralized AI development community. Ocean Protocol, which is another decentralized AI project focused on the data economy and decentralized handling of big data, is also putting a lot of effort and code and developer time in here. I mean, this is one of the frustrating things to those of us involved with the whole blockchain decentralized ecosystem is, now with this crisis happening, you would really like critical things to be done in a decentralized way. Say tracking and tracing people with COVID as one among many examples, or connecting sick people with physicians. I mean, it would be far more efficient and effective and beneficial, and also less dangerous in terms of handing over control to centralized entities, if all these necessary services now were provided by decentralized networks. And the bottom line is, the centralized tech ecosystem is moving faster now. So I mean, Google and Apple in the US are rolling out a tracing system to help track and trace movement of people with COVID. Now, there's a bunch of software projects aimed at providing this in a decentralized blockchain-based way with no big company, no centralized authority involved. I mean, there's SafePath from MIT, there's WeTrace out of Switzerland, there's a bunch of others brewing from Ocean Protocol and then the COVID-a-thon. But the bottom line is now Apple and Google have much more mature software, and they have the user base, right? And so that they're rolling this out, and that's okay. Now that's what it is. I mean, we need whatever works best. If that's a mix of centralized and decentralized, so be it. But we'd like to see to what extent can we help with the current situation using decentralized tools to minimize the degree to which this pandemic becomes a mechanism for centralized authorities to gather more and more information and take more and more control, but also looking forward toward the technological singularity and the probability of a lot more disruptions, both positive and negative and mixed, occurring along the path to the singularity. You know, what can we do to build the infrastructure so that with the next global crisis, there's a decentralized infrastructure that's ready and really slick and easy for people to use and will deliver what's needed. Otherwise, what you're going to see is each global crisis, each disruption that we pass through on the path to the technological singularity is going to involve handing over a little more data centralization and a little more control to a combination of big tech and big government. Because in a crisis, of course, if your life is at risk, sure, take my data. Sure, government, take control. Just save my life, right? And so that we want to save everyone's life that can be saved now and in the future. But we also want to ensure that as future crises unfold, you know, these can be used to drive toward positive consciousness, as Gabe was saying, and they could be used to drive towards, you know, broader and broader usage of robust, decentralized infrastructure. So yeah, with COVID-a-thon, we're trying to build stuff that's useful right now, and we're trying to build the infrastructure so that in future crises, there's a whole decentralized tool set and ecosystem at the ready.
So just one last question, and I'll let you get on the way with your walk there. If there's one more, say if there's another viral release in say 5 years, and this virus is worse, you know, as we heard from David QUAMMEN at the beginning, who talks about, you know, all the things that we do that leads to the release of viruses and so forth. But let's say we're 5 years down the road. Do you think we'll be in a much better position to leverage AI to kind of like inform the conversation? It seems like the government's
we absolutely will be in a much better position to leverage AI 5 years from now for pandemics or other global crises. And this is, if for no other reason, because AI is developing incredibly quickly on its own. I mean, application of AI to medicine, to genomics, to social science. I mean, to distributed data analytics. I mean, AI is going really, really fast these days. So I mean, now the governments of the world have released, you know, openly all these COVID research papers. But right now, our AI can help us search through these papers, but the AI can't deeply understand the papers. It can do some data mining. In 5 years, we're going to have AI that can understand tremendously more of what's in these research papers and maybe writing its own papers that people struggle to understand. So the question isn't whether in 5 years AI will be much better positioned to help. It will be. The question that's more worrisome is who will control that AI, and will the powerful AI that can help us solve future crises, will it just serve to centralize power more and more in the hands of a few large companies and government agencies? And then what does that mean in terms of the ethics and motivational system and long-term impact of these AIs?
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, you know, I hope that your work supersedes all the work that's happening, you know, behind closed doors and so forth. I think this open way of developing sounds intuitively like the way for humanity to move forward. So thank you so much for jumping on the call today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Obviously, there's so many. These are such deep topics, and there's so many directions they can go in. But yeah, we can see, you know, from the other talks that I was listening to and from our own conversation, I mean, certainly this crisis is a major point of disruption, and it's very bad. I mean, I know people who died from COVID and others who are sick. It's a terrible thing. But it is also, it's a point of opportunity to, you know, to grab the moment and start processes that will lead to positive changes during the next next period after this. And yeah, I mean, that's what I've enjoyed about this event, is we have a bunch of different perspectives on how to do that, how to grab the moment and use this to affect positive changes, whether it's improvements in social and political systems, or giving people a chance to upgrade their consciousness, or giving the decentralized AI community a chance to pull together and create stronger and stronger tools for dealing with crises. So yeah, it's been an inspiring series of talks to listen to. So thanks for pulling this event together.
Awesome, thank you. So I'll be staying tuned to SingularityNet and all the work that you do, and I'm sure I'll be reaching out to you again in the near future to discuss some more opportunities. Have a wonderful day.
All right. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. That wraps up our little live stream for the day. I'm sure to a lot of people it seemed like quite a hodgepodge of different subjects. I started out by saying that, one of the philosophies was to talk about anything, we had to talk about everything, and that's exactly what we did. I hope it was helpful and interesting to those who stayed tuned. Have a wonderful day and stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you so much.